Hi folks, I'm Matt and welcome to my top 80 vintage board games of all time. Woo! Boy, do I like some vintage board games. Okay, so let me tell you why this list is at 80. Right now, I currently have about 86, 87 vintage board games. And I thought about just ranking them all, like Matt's top 87. That seems kind of weird though, doesn't it? So I just cut it off at 80. Maybe next year I'll accumulate enough to have 100 board games of all time, and then I can do that vintage list there. Another reason I'm doing the vintage list is because I am currently making my top 100 board games of all time videos. And as I was writing the list out, I realized that a lot of my games that were dropping out of the top 100 were my beautiful vintage board games. Now, it seemed a little unfair because a lot of vintage board games, a lot of the older ones, were made for kids, where current board games are made more for adults. That doesn't mean that vintage board games aren't fun. Nay, nay, nay. I love a lot of vintage board games. I don't play them as much as I used to, but I still every once in a while do have special groups that come over every once in a while, and my nephews as well, who love playing these games. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to make a separate list of vintage board games only. And that way, they can still hold a place in my heart, and you can still tell how important they are to me. Now, because these games have been pulled onto their own list, expect just about every game on the list to move up from last year's spot on the list. But that's because they're on their own separate list. So a lot of them automatically go up, obviously. Other things, you will see some of my vintage board games on this, not all of them. There are a few vintage board games that I have in my collection that made it onto my top 100 board games of all time. And so we'll get to that list later on. Now, this all being said, my rules for the list was it has to be something in my collection, and it also has to be something that is at least 15 years or older. Now, a lot of these are children's games, but not all of them are. And also, there is only one game that I had on my top 100 last year that is a vintage game that is no longer on this list. A, because I never played it, and then B, it's not in my collection anymore. That is the game Pit. I think it was number 98 last year. And I said in my review, I said, now, if I can get this to the table, this hopefully will stay in my collection for a very long time. And I didn't get to the table at all. It was so hard to get to the table. No one wanted to play Pit. I even brought it on our beach vacation, my whole family, who used to love playing Pit. This is the exact same copy that we had as kids when we played it all together. And I remember one day at the beach, my whole family was bored. They even said, do we have a deck of cards? Let's play some cards. What can we play? Let's do something. I want to play a card game or something. It was the perfect time to present Pit. And I said, hey guys, I brought Pit. Y'all want to play Pit? And they went, we'll play bridge. And that's when I knew it had to go. So, sorry Pit, you're gone. I donated the game, and now I am pitless. Anyway, so here it is, my top 80 vintage board games of all time. We're going to start with number 80. Number 80 is Carrier Strike. In Carrier Strike, you are in charge of an aircraft carrier, two of them, and you are flying out these airplanes to your opponent. You're both battling it out in like basically a card number style like you play in regular card battle, and you're also trying to dump your missile load and hopefully hit the carrier with it. First person to destroy the other person's carriers wins. Folks, this is a huge game. The pieces are beautiful, and it is a really fun one to play. My friend THH1138 showed me this game on his channel. I was like, wow, that looks cool. And so I got it. Now, it gets ranked number 80 because it is a two-player game, and I don't really play many two-player games because, you know, thankfully, I've been blessed to have a huge board game group, and a lot of people come over at one time, so it's hard to play just a two-player game when you have a lot of people. But it is a really fun game, and my number 80 on this list. Number 79 is the game Fat Chance. And Fat Chance, you are these big fat men rolling around a board trying to gobble up as many food pellets as you can. And of course, the person with the most pellets at the end wins. There are times you're going to have to challenge other people to see if they have more than you. You're going to put them on this little plastic scale, which doesn't work. And if you saw my review, you're thinking, wait a minute, Matt, I remember in your review you said Fat chance I'll ever play this one again. Whoa, 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 whoa. Well, you know what? I actually changed a few things up. We rewrote the rules a little bit. That scale is totally pointless because the food pellets are made of this, like, it's almost like driftwood. It's so light. So we filled up one person with tons of food pellets and one person with no food pellets, and we could barely tell the scale on those. We didn't, the scale is plastic, and I guess they thought, oh, all the wood pellets will weigh it down. It doesn't. It's very hard to tell which one weighs the more, especially when you have some that are just a few off. They look exactly the same on the scale. So we just did away with the scale, and now we just play a guessing game. And you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Matt, can't you just count the pellets everyone's doing? You probably could at first, but there's 3 other players, and they're gobbling more than one pellet at a time. So you'll lose count quickly, believe me. And so you're going to challenge someone, then we're going to open it up and count the pellets. Does it slow down the game than weighing the pellets would? Yeah, but it's still a fun game. Also, I added a huge die, 6-sided die that has multicolors, and as you saw, the board is very colored. You know, it's a very multicolored board. So this die goes well with the theme of the board and makes the game a little bit pop a little bit better, I should say. And so for that reason, it is on my list. It is a game I do enjoy, and it is number 79 on this list. Number 78 is Pizza Party. In this game, you have a slice of pizza, and you're randomly selecting tiles, hopefully, that equal the toppings on your pizza. You're going to be pepperoni, green peppers, mushrooms, or onions. And you're trying to complete a full slice of pizza with all the very same toppings on there. However, you could get a tile that says you have to switch with a certain other player, and that can make you win the game because you have more, they have more toppings than you, or that could really hurt your gameplay because they only had like 2 toppings and you had like 5. It is very, very random, and I had this game as a kid back in the 90s. I did buy a copy of this game to play. My little brother, when he was on my podcast, he actually said this is one of his favorite games to play back in the day, and still today. In fact, after that podcast, we broke out the game and played a little round together, and it was a lot of fun. It's totally random, totally for kids, but my number 78 on this list. My number 77 is Shake Bingo. In Shake Bingo, you are rolling these die and then putting your little poker chips covering the numbers of the dice you rolled. Of course, there is a wild card number that you can roll, and you can place it anywhere on the board, and you're trying to get a bingo with, you know, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. And that's just the game. That's it in a nutshell. It's a very simple board, very cheap, very, you know, chitsy plastic board. Now, why did this game make my list? Much less, you know, up into the top 80 a little bit here. Well, that's because this has a lot of memories for me. This game was the only game that my grandmother had at her house. So when we went to visit for the holidays and it was raining outside and there was nothing to do, we would break out some Shake Bingo and we'd play a few rounds together. That was something we did to pass the time. So when I saw this game in an antique store for $1, I snatched it up immediately. Now, it didn't make my list last year because I hadn't played it, and this year we opened it up. We finally played it just a few games with my wife and I, and we had a really fun time. There's nothing much else to this game, and it's a lot of nostalgia going with me, but who cares? This is my vintage board game list, baby, and I'm keeping it strong at number 77 on that list. My number 76 is the first classic board game that I have on my list. Last year I had it at number 9, so that means it's gone up 23 spots on this vintage list of its own, and that is the game Battleship. I did buy a 90s copy of the game that I had as a kid, so there's a lot of good memories with that. I haven't played it this year, but would love to play it again. Battleship, classic game, so much fun. That's why it's my number 76. Speaking of classics, my number 75 is also a classic. It is Othello. I actually was given a copy of this game by a friend of mine, Norm, from the Board Game Museum, and it happened to be the exact same copy that I had and played back in the 90s. It has a nice felt overlay over it, and I always love that. And I have a million memories of playing that game as a kid with my aunt, uncle, mom, dad, brothers, everyone. I love that game. In fact, I looked for that game, and my mom had thrown away the copy because the little pieces had gotten lost a long time ago. So I was super happy to get a copy from Norm, and even though it hasn't been played yet, it will be soon because 2-player games don't get played that much, but the missus did tell me she was going to play it with me. Love Othello. My number 75. My number 74 was number 98 on my list last year. That means it's gone up 24 4 spots. And that game would be Milton Bradley's Crash Canyon. Now, Crash Canyon was a game made from Micro Machines where you drove them around a 3D board and you just raced them through a canyon of boulders using turbo tokens to go faster and basically just zipping around this board. Now, the cool thing about this game was if you reached a spot that was on an incline or decline, you had to let your Micro Machine go and see if it would move further down the road or move back down the road, or, horror of horrors, move off the road and fall into one of the canyons. And then you have to take the long way out. So there is a little skill in this game, because when you release it, you hope it rolls just right. Now, the game does give you 4 Micro Machines, and they tell you that you can play this with any of your Micro Machines that you have. I don't have any anymore, but I did as a kid. And oh man, if I'd had this game as a kid, I'd have probably used this as a playset more than anything else. But it is a fun game. We've actually played this game this year. My nephews really enjoyed the game. And there's, like I said, a little skill, especially getting over that bridge. There's a bridge token you have to drive over. And it's so hard sometimes to get it over there. And sometimes you're falling in, taking the long way out, and falling in again. Oh, aggravating. But it is a fun game, and that is why it's number 74 on this list. My number 73 was number 91 on the list last year. So now that I've separated the list, this one has moved up 18 incredible spots, and that is another classic game called Millebornes. Millebornes is the card game where you're trying to race up to 1,000 miles. You're playing cards that will benefit you or hurt others. I was actually fortunate enough to buy a copy very similar to the one I had as a kid, the 70s version. I got it for like $1 at a thrift store. I was like pumped. And my wife and I have played it. My wife loves the game. My nephews still play this with my mom. My mom will play the game with them every once in a while. It's like one of the few games my mom still plays and loves. So Millebornes, my number 72. Number 73, because number 72 is Chopper Strike. Got that wrong. Chopper Strike is a game. It's so unique. You have this clear plastic tray that you put over the board. And on top of that, you're going to have helicopters. Below that, Jeeps. And Jeeps are destroying Jeeps. Helicopters destroying helicopters. And Jeeps destroying helicopters and vice versa. It's total madness. This is a fantastic and very unique game with a very unique concept, which I am so confused has not been implemented in future board games. Current board games could totally benefit from this. Can you imagine putting a clear plastic tray and you could connect it together over the actual board game so that any pieces that fly will play on the top board while the pieces on the ground will stay on the ground level floor. I think it's just screaming for someone to take that concept and building it into something really cool. But I haven't seen it from anyone else except for this old game from the 70s. Now, Chopper Strike was my number 76 last year. So that means it's moved up 4 spots in the rankings as it has a list on its own. But this game is super fun. I actually got to play this game earlier this year with a friend of mine who had it as a kid. And he actually showed me there's actually some more strategy in this game than usual. This is a game I also brought around the holidays, and while we were decorating the tree with my family, I brought the game and me and my nephews played it. It's a lot of fun. So Chopper Strike, my number 72. My number 71 was number 85 on my list last year. It's gone up 14 spots now that's on a vintage game list, and that is the game Dragon Strike. And Dragon Strike, you are adventurers moving around Dragon's Cave trying to get a red and blue gem. Once you've got both of those, then you can enter in the secret passageway to collect the golden eggs of the dragon. But watch out, if you roll a 3 or a 5, the mechanical dragon will swivel its head around and it may knock that gem or egg off of your head, which means you have to go all around the board to go back and get it, or any other player behind you can pick it up and make a mad dash for the exit. And that's exactly what this game is. This is a mad dash around the board 1 billion times. It does get a little repetitive because I think they should have only made the dragon get activated through 1 number on the die instead of 2 numbers on a 6-sided die, because you would be surprised how many 3s and 5s get rolled in that game. So maybe if they made like a 1 or a 6, a 1, that would be awesome. A 1. Instead instead of moving, you hit the dragon. Maybe I should house rule that next time. See if that works better. But it is fun pressing. You press one of the dragon scales. He's battery operated. His neck kind of swivels around like one of those old snake toys you had that had all the interconnected blocks. That's what the dragon's head is. My wife absolutely adores this game. Now, whenever her family comes visit us over the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas, this game is definitely going to hit the table, and we're definitely going to play it, and they love it. They love screaming as the dragon barely misses you and hits the person behind you. I got to admit, that is a great feeling. I love that. But it does get a little long in the tooth, because if it keeps knocking off your jewel, you have to go all the way around the board to pick it up or pick up another one. But thankfully, once someone gets the golden eggs out underneath the secret passage of the dragon's lair, then it's a free-for-all for the eggs. But it is a really fun game. I do enjoy it, which is why it's number 71 on this list. My number 70 was number 90 last year, so that means on the vintage list it's moved up 20 spots. And you're going to be surprised when you hear about this game, because even I didn't know it was this old. The game is called Pie Face. In Pie Face, you're putting whipped cream on a hand and then spinning the spinner to see how many twists you have to give the handles on this contraption. And one of those twists, randomly selected, will release the hand and smack you in the face with whipped cream. Yep, and people buy a game for that. This is an extremely fun game. I almost want to call this a party game, really. It's not really a serious game. This one got repackaged a couple of years ago and was all the rave. And I remember my work group said, Matt, you should get that game. We should play it, because we have a little party, goodie days at work where we do a little game too. And they said, that would be fun. So I went out and I bought it, because I was the board game guy, right? And we play it, and we still play it at work annually for our little goodie day, our little fun day at work. And not everyone plays it, because no one wants to get hit in the face with whipped cream, but it is still a fun game. And one of the few games I actually brought up to work with me. This is also unique because this game is a mandatory game I must bring to every beach vacation. A few years ago, I did not bring this game, and I got chewed out. It's like, how could you not bring Pie Face? We love Pie Face. We want to play Pie Face. So from now on, every time I go to my family vacation, Pie Face must be one of the games we play. And I'll be honest, it's a lot of fun. Even though my little nephews, they get upset if they don't lose. Everyone wants to get hit in the face with whipped cream. I think that kind of defeats the purpose of the entire game. But either way, it is a fun game. I do enjoy playing it, and it is number 70 on this list. My number 69 is called Bulldog Dozer. In Bulldog Dozer, you're carrying this battery-operated bulldozer that's being operated by a bulldog as it spins around and around. Then you're going to drop it on the board. It's going to move over that board and push some I-beams off the board. Whatever I-beams it pushes off the board, you're going to use those to construct a tower. If you can construct a 3-tier tower and put the little flag on top, you win the game. This game is for children, but it is extremely fun. Me and my nephews love playing it because sometimes if you will drop it just right, it'll attack someone else's tower and bulldoze their entire tower, which is so cool when that happens. And that's usually how someone's going to win the game, is by bulldozing someone else's tower down, because it's a great catch-up mechanism too. If you think about it, I have only 3 I-beams. You're one short of making your tower, but I happen to drop the Bulldog Dozer just right to where he's bulldozing over your tower, and I get all your I-beams and win the game. I mean, the game can end like that, and it can be anyone's game. Now, we have to make a house rule that you can't look when you drop it, because some of my nephews were forcing it to drop at certain areas where they knew it would take out someone else's tower who's about to win. So what we do, we make a rule. You have to look up and then just drop it on the board and see what happens. Now, you don't drop it from too high a measure or it'll shake the table. So you make sure you want to put it on some solid ground. But when you drop the Bulldog Dozer, it does not shake the towers. The towers are pretty firm that way. But it's got some strategy there too on what you want to do. And of course, it is based off luck, I guess I should say. Not much strategy, more luck. But there is sometimes on the spinner you can get some good things going on. There's a guy who blocks the Bulldog Bulldog Dozer, which is huge in the game. So if you get that, you're like, yes! So fun little kids game, my number 69 on the list. My number 68 was number 97 last year on my old list. That means it's moved up 29 spots to be here. And that is the classic game Memory. Now I have the same exact copy from the 70s that I had as a kid. I found it again for like $2 in an antique store, and I'd been holding out on it because I wanted to find that particular version because I have a lot of memories playing Memory. I still would play Memory in a heartbeat. It's just memorizing and finding a match. That's it. It's so simple, but it's so much fun. And basically anyone can win. Any big kid can beat a little kid, and little kids can beat big kids, adults at it, if they have the right memory, because maybe little kids may be better at it because my memory isn't what it used to be. But the game of Memory is super fun, and that's why it's on my list at number 68. My number 67 was number 100 on my list last year. That means it's moved up 33 spots now that it's on a list of its own. And it's one of the reasons I decided to make a vintage board game list, because I didn't want it off my top favorite games, because I still dadgum love this game. And that is How the Ewoks Save the Trees. In this game, you are a little fuzzy, cute little Ewok pawn, and you're moving around this board, and it's very similar to Candyland, where you're pushing one of these two dials and getting that color, and so you're moving your pawn to that color. Now sometimes if it's just a clear empty space that you turned on the dial, then you will get to block or unblock certain paths for Ewoks, or create trap doors for Ewoks, which is really cool, or open the door to the Tree of Life, which is how you win the game, by moving up the steps and entering into the tree. It is a simple game. It's one of those little pop-up and play games, so setup for it is extremely easy. You just open up the board, it pops right up, it's like those pop-up books, and then you start playing. The pawns, though, look really nice, and they didn't have to make it like that. In fact, if these were the old paper, slide them in the little holders, I wouldn't even own this game. But it's because those Ewok pawns look so nice. And my wife had got me this game for Christmas one year, because she knew I liked Ewoks. And so when I saw the pawns, I was like, oh my, I am interested in this game. This game is awesome. My wife and I still do play this every once in a while because my wife loves these vintage board games. So she's a real fan of the vintage board games, as I am too. And so Ewoks Save the Trees, still going strong, except this time on my list, it's number 67. Number 66 on the list was number 89 last year. That means it's moved up 23 spots, and it is the classic game Connect 4. Who doesn't love Connect 4, right? It's the only game that can end in either 3 seconds, or could go the whole way and no one win, or my favorite, you're playing this epic game and suddenly someone missed something that you saw and you got the Connect 4, and they don't see it until you have to point it out to them. They go, no! It's great. Another good feeling is when you can make Connect 4 on 2 different ends, and they see that now and they're like, there's nothing I can do, and then they just go ahead and just release the gates and let them all drop because they don't want to play that last token. It's so much fun. It's so much fun. I bought a newer version of the game, and it gets played every once in a while. It doesn't get played as much as it should, I'll say that, and that's probably because it's a 2-player game, but I still love this classic game, which is why it's number 66 on the list. My number 65 was number 88 last year. That means it's moved up 23 spots. This game is not a children's game, but it is a vintage game that I'm going to put on the list here, and it is the classic 3M game, Feudal. In Feudal, you are moving pieces among a peg board, and pieces, depending on who they are, can move different spots and areas on the board in different ways, I should say, and you're trying to get one of those pawns into the opposing player's castle. Now you can play this up to 4 players, but they said 4 players in teams of 2. We actually found a house rule where we gave everyone a corner on the board and played 4-on-4 all-out war. Now that's insane, it's crazy, and you probably won't enjoy the game if you do that. We did. We had a ton of fun with Feudal. 3M games made games for adults. They look like bookshelf games, so you could put them on your bookshelf. It looked like a book, and it could open up into this wonderful game. They had a bunch of cheap little games that didn't really do much, but then every once in a while they come up with an ingenious idea for a game, and some of these games even get reprinted. Feudal's one of them that I really like. I really think it's a strong game, and if you have someone that just loves chess and they're not into board games, I would suggest getting Feudal. Feudal is like chess, but the pieces move differently, and the objectives or the goal is a little different too. But Feudal's a really great game to maybe get that board, that gateway gamer in there if they just like chess and checkers. So anyway, there it is, Feudal, my number 65. Now number 64, I kind of have a tie here, but that's because the games are very similar. It is X-Men Alert and X-Men Under Siege. First off, X-Men Alert, you are one of the millions of X-Men pieces they have in the game, and you're moving onto the board and fighting one of the villains that are presented there. If you get the killing blow, you get those victory points, and you get to move up the victory track, and the first one to get up to the top of that victory track wins. And X-Men Under Siege is basically the same thing, but instead of just moving on and off a board, you're actually moving around a board into the X-Men manner, and you're fighting bad guys on various levels and getting points. And your points happen when you clear a room, meaning you have a majority of the tokens on that level. And the X-Men Mansion obviously has 1 billion levels or something. And if I had to pick between the two, I'd probably pick Under Siege because it's a little bit more fun, but I do enjoy playing both. Now, I bought these games like over a year ago. I played them with my little nephews. We had fun. I boxed them up, and then we went on with more games. I had totally forgotten how much fun these games were until I did my review of them earlier this year, and I thought, wow, these are really fun games. These are really good. I really like being the X-Men here. It's a neat mechanism. I wish you could move around the board a little bit better. I mean, X-Men Under Siege does that. X-Men Alert, you're just moving onto the board, fighting the bad guy, and stepping off the board and letting another X-Men come in. Kind of boring, especially when you have awesome pieces. But it does have different characters you can be, and just a few different characters from the different board games. I really love it. I found this out from one of my buddies on one of my podcasts. He used to play X-Men Under Siege all the time. He told me about it. I looked it up. I was like, dude, I'm going to get this game. So I got both of them for a really good deal, brought them to him, say, hey, look, man, I got the X-Men games. You want to play them? He went, maybe after we play one of these other games. He wasn't that interested in playing the old vintage games anymore. But I was like, well, dude, I still love them. So I am super happy to have them on my list, and super happy that they're number 64. Number 63 was number 94 on my list last year. That means it's moved up 32 spots, and it is the classic game, the ultimate classic game, Monopoly. I love Monopoly. There's still some people out there who, there's vintage gamers like, oh, Monopoly, oh, I don't like Monopoly. Well, guess what, folks? I grew up on Monopoly. It was weird, I know, but I even had my own made-up Monopoly board. I think I had the McDonald's Monopoly, paper menu. I had it all in a cigar box, an old cigar box. I had the paper menu in there. I had these weird-looking pawns that I used as my Monopoly pawns, and then some old cards, Chance and Community Chest and property cards from an old game my mom had thrown away but kept the pieces. So I had this hobnob collection of my own little mini Monopoly game. Did we have a regular Monopoly game? We did have a regular Monopoly game, but I had this cobbled together, it all fit in a little cigar box, and I brought it with me, and I would just break it out and I'd play by myself a lot of times as the purple, red, yellow player, There are these weird looking pawns. I don't even know what that game was for, those pawns were. But anyway, lots of memories in these games. Plus, my wife, not that big of a board gamer, loves vintage games, and Monopoly is one of her favorite games. She absolutely loves Monopoly. So that is why it's on my list at number 63. Number 62 was number 95 on my list last year. It moves up 34 spots, and it is also a classic game. The classic game of life. I have the 70s version. I bought a copy for $1 in an antique store. It's the same copy that I had growing up, and it was one of the first vintage games I actually got. When I started getting into the hobby, I realized, man, I like a lot of these older games. And so when I found the game of life for like $1 at the antique store here in town, I was like, well, I'll get it for $1. I thought all games were going to be cheap. Well, even though I did find some good deals from time to time, Life thankfully was one of those I didn't have to pay a lot for. I still play Life. I actually played Life this year with my wife. We had a great time. I think she won this time, but it doesn't matter. There is nothing more satisfying than spinning that wheel and listen to it. Click, 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 click. Ah, I love it. Why don't we have more wheel spinners in games, man? But the game of life is a classic game, and of course, it is number 62 on my list. And finally, my number 61 is Curse of the Idol by Milton Bradley. This is one of their adventure games that came out years ago that hardly gets any press. In Curse of the Idol, you are adventurers going through a temple, going through a board that will shift and move, even has revolving walls in it, and you're trying to get a sword to get to the statue, to stick in one of the statue's 6 openings. If you guessed right, you'll release the bloodstone, and then it's an all-out race to get back to home base. But watch it, because there's a black player pawn in this who is called the villain, and he's trying to stop you from removing the bloodstone. Now, I think that's really interesting. This game came out back in the 80s, and yet, or maybe early 90s, I can't remember, but they had the foresight to say, hey, you know what, we're going to have a character that no one can play as, but everyone can move, and it's the villain. It's called the villain, who's trying to stop you. Shouldn't he be the hero? Aren't we the villains for robbing this temple? I don't know. But it's kind of unique that they have that there. You can't go past the villain. And actually Luke from Down from the Attic did a wonderful review of the show, this game, where he kind of changed some of the rules and he house ruled a lot of things. We play with those house rules in there and love the game. It's a really fun game. It is a mad race trying to get back. It's kind of similar to Fireball Island. You know, once you get the jewel, everyone's going for you. Once you get the bloodstone, everyone is going for you. You know, and you're trying to avoid everyone and avoid the villain to try to be the first one to get back to home. Great game, super fun. Luke, thank you if you're watching for your house rules. They have done this board game a great service. All right, folks, that's it for now. Hey, come back and see what my top 60 vintage board games of all time are. I'll see you then.